My name's Kyle Morgan. I used to think the desert was empty. That was before I took the job at the gas station off Route 86. Before I found out what silence actually sounds like. Before I learned there are worse things than being alone. They say the desert is peaceful, quiet, dead even. But they don't tell you how the wind moves at night like it's looking for something. They don't tell you about the way shadows stretch just a little too far. They don't tell you about the gas station that only hires night shift workers who don't ask questions. I got the job after a string of disappointments. Lost my position at a factory in Salt Lake after the shutdown. My girlfriend, Jess, left a week later. Said I had too much time and not enough drive. She wasn't wrong. I was sleeping in the back of my truck, living off vending machine meals and motel showers. I remember the morning I found the flyer. It was taped to the side of a payphone at a truck stop just outside 2L. The wind was brutal that day, biting and dry, but the flyer didn't even flutter. It said, hiring, night shift attendant, Route 86, gas, cash daily, quiet work, must work alone. Apply in person. There was no phone number or name, just a general location scribbled in fading ink. I took a photo of it and zoomed in just to read it. I didn't have the luxury of being picky. My gas tank was nearly empty. I told myself I'd drive out, take a look, and if it felt wrong, I'd turn around. But I never turned around. I drove for nearly 2 hours across the cracked, sun-bleached pavement. The GPS gave out 15 minutes in. Nothing but open land, broken fences, and a sky so wide it made you feel small. By the time I spotted the station, the sun was already dipping low behind the hills. It looked like a bunker more than a business. A squat concrete box sagging under its weight. There were 4 pumps, one of them duct-taped shut. The neon gas sign buzzed and flickered weakly, and something about the way it buzzed, it sounded less electric and more alive. There were no cars, no other buildings, not even power lines. Just that single station sitting stubbornly in the middle of nowhere. Inside, the air was stale and chemically clean, like the place had been doused in disinfectant years ago and then sealed shut. The register looked like something you'd find in a museum. The shelves held the saddest selection of snacks I'd ever seen. Candy bars fused to their wrappers, a row of expired jerky sticks. In the far corner, a cooler rumbled like it was trying to die but couldn't. It held 1 bottle of orange soda, floating in half-melted ice. Behind the counter stood a man, short, wiry, maybe in his late 50s. He wore a faded blue shirt and had a notebook open in front of him, writing in quick, messy loops. He didn't look up when I entered. "You the one for the night shift?" he asked, like he already knew the answer. "Yeah," I said. "Name's Kyle Morgan." He finally glanced up, eyes sunken and tired. Without a word, he reached under the counter and tossed me a ring of keys. 3 of them, old, brass, slightly sticky to the touch. "Office, restroom, supply closet," he said. "Don't touch the register. You won't need it." "Okay," I said. "What else do I—" He cut me off with a hand gesture and walked around the counter. His boots made this dull, sticky sound on the tile floor as he passed me. He motioned for me to follow, so I did. The hallway behind the main room was narrow and dim, lit by a single overhead bulb that buzzed with flies. The walls were yellowed and stained, and the ceiling tiles sagged in the corners. I thought I smelled something beneath the bleach, something organic and unpleasant, like meat left too long in the sun. He stopped at a metal door and turned to me. "The rules are posted in the office. You follow them. You'll be fine. Don't follow them." He let the sentence hang like it didn't need finishing. "What kind of rules?" I asked, but he was already unlocking the back door. He stepped outside into the wind, walked across the lot to an old pickup truck, and opened the door. Before he got in, he looked back at me. "First night's the test," he said. "Don't die." Then he drove off. Just like that. There wasn't any paperwork, no ID check, and not a single emergency contact form in sight. Just me, the keys, and whatever the hell the rules meant. I stood in the hallway a moment longer, unsure whether I should laugh or walk away. But something about the building, the desert, the quiet, something kept me rooted. It was like I'd crossed a line, and going back wasn't an option anymore. The office was tucked into the very back of the station. The door creaked like it hadn't been opened in days. Inside, it was stuffy and dark, with a single desk pressed against the wall. A small fan spun slowly in the corner, doing absolutely nothing. The desk held a stack of receipts, a dried-out pen, and a jar filled with dusty candy. But what caught my eye was the laminated sheet pinned to the corkboard above the desk. Someone had nailed it in with rusted tacks, the corners curled and stained. At first glance, I assumed it was a safety sheet. Then I read the first line. Lock the front door at exactly 11:59 p.m. Do not open it again for anyone until sunrise. Even if they knock, even if they beg. That was strange. I kept reading. If pump number 4 starts dispensing fuel without a customer present, go outside and press the red reset button. Do not look at your reflection in the pump glass while doing this. The payphone by the ice machine will ring at 1:13 a.m. You must not answer it. It will stop after 13 rings. If a man wearing a sheriff's uniform enters the station and asks for coffee, make him one. Do not charge him. Do not speak. Do not break eye contact. He will leave when finished. If you hear someone knocking inside the supply closet, ignore it. That door stays locked, always. Lights may flicker between 3 a.m. and 3:10 a.m. If they flicker 3 times quickly, go to the restroom and lock the farthest stall. Close your eyes and count to 60. Do not stop, no matter what you hear. Do not fall asleep. You must not sleep while on the property. If you begin to feel drowsy, eat something sweet and recite your name, loudly, repeatedly. I read the list twice, then a third time. It didn't feel like a joke. There was nothing ironic in the tone, no gotcha at the end. Just cold, matter-of-fact instructions. The kind of thing someone writes after trial and error. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the alternative was starting to feel too real. My voice sounded thin in the still air. The moment it left my mouth, I wished I hadn't let it out. I told myself I'd follow the rules, just in case. Not because I believed them, but because something about that place told me it wasn't interested in what I believed. And in places like that, you follow the rules. Or the place makes new ones just for you. At 11:59 p.m., I locked the front door and waited. The second night felt different before it even began. I remember sitting in my truck just outside the gas station, the engine idling low, headlights pointed at the faded walls. The sky above was that deep violet blue you only get out here, past the last traces of city light. The kind of sky that makes you feel like you're being watched by something too big to see all at once. I hadn't really slept since the first shift. I just closed my eyes and drifted in and out while the heater blew dry air through my bones. Every time I started to nod off, I heard knocking. It didn't come from outside or in any direction I could point to, just knocking, dull and rhythmic, like someone tapping their fingers from inside my skull. It always stopped when I sat up. I told myself it was stress, that this place was just getting under my skin. But something had shifted. The silence no longer felt like emptiness. It felt full, like the air itself was waiting for me. At 8:58 p.m., I killed the engine and stepped out. Everything looked the same dust clinging to the windows, the same sagging gas sign trying to buzz its way into oblivion. But the moment I opened the front door, I could tell the inside wasn't quite as I'd left it. The cooler in the corner was running louder now, vibrating against the tile. The soda bottle was gone, and someone, or something, had scratched a line through the 2 on the clock above the register. It now read 1:59. Just numbers, I thought. Maybe I did it and forgot. Maybe it's nothing. I turned the lock behind me, even though I wouldn't need it for another 3 hours. Then I walked the perimeter, trying to act like I was doing something important. Floor tiles, Windows, bathrooms, all clear. I even checked the supply closet. Still locked, still silent. When I stepped into the office, the air felt heavier. It wasn't hotter or colder, just denser, like someone had stuffed the room full of invisible cotton. I looked at the laminated rule sheet again, not to read it, not really. I already knew it by heart. I think I just wanted to see if it had changed. It hadn't. But something else had. On the desk, next to the candy jar, sat the bottle of orange soda. The same one that had vanished from the cooler. It was the same brand, with condensation dripping lazily down its side. I hadn't brought it there. No one else had been in the station. I would have heard the bell above the door. I reached out and touched it. Cold. Not just fridge cold. Freezing. It burned my fingertips like dry ice. I pulled my hand back and watched the moisture on the bottle start to sizzle, evaporating in the still air. I left it where it was. The hours dragged on. I kept glancing at the pumps outside, especially pump number 4. I don't know why. Maybe it was because of the rule. Maybe it was the way it sat slightly crooked, like something had bumped it too hard years ago and no one bothered to fix it. It leaned just a little, casting a warped shadow across the cracked asphalt. At 12:11 a.m., pump number 4 turned on. There wasn't a car or any sound, just the red glow of the LED display blinking, $0, 0 cents, 0.00 gallons. Pumping. I froze. The rule didn't say what to do right away, just that I had to go outside and reset it, and not look at the reflection. Easy enough, right? I grabbed the keys, stepped out into the dry wind, and told myself this was just a mechanical error. Nothing supernatural about an old pump acting up. Static maybe. Some power surge. I approached slowly, my boots crunching the gravel like it was too loud. The further I got from the station lights, the darker it felt, even with the pump's flickering overhead bulb buzzing above me. When I reached the side panel, I looked down, keeping my eyes away from the mirror. The reflection's not real, I told myself. Don't look, just hit the red button. The button was tucked just under the nozzle holster, a little recessed. I had to crouch to see it. As I reached down, I caught movement in the glass. Something shifted in the mirror. I didn't look straight at it, but I caught the motion. Just a flicker, just enough to feel it. A figure, about my height and build, standing where my reflection should have been. But it wasn't right. It was frozen in place, too rigid as if caught mid-step and held there by something unseen. The arms hung too perfectly, the shoulders too square. There was nothing fluid about it, no trace of motion that felt human or real. Just a pause in reality. I reached down and slammed the red button. The pump clicked, the screen blinked, and the numbers vanished. I didn't dare look back up. Even without seeing it, I knew the shape was still there, unmoving, still watching. I straightened slowly, breathing through my nose, and backed away from the pump without turning around. I wasn't running, not really, just walking calmly, like I hadn't just seen something that looked like me but didn't move like me. By the time I reached the door, I was shaking. Inside, the lights flickered once, then again, then again. I stopped breathing. 3 flickers. That was another rule. I remember the words exactly. If the lights flicker 3 times quickly, go to the restroom and lock the farthest stall. Close your eyes and count to 60. Do not stop, no matter what you hear. I didn't want to go in there. Every part of my body screamed to stay put, to hide in the office, to wait it out. But the rules weren't suggestions. I made my way to the restroom, heart thudding like a drum in my throat. The light above the mirror buzzed as I stepped in. Cold tiles underfoot, smell of ammonia and something older underneath it. The far stall was open. I stepped in and closed the door behind me, locked it, slid the metal bolt shut, closed my eyes. 1, I whispered. The moment I said it, I heard something shuffle across the floor outside the stall. 2. Footsteps, slow, dragging. 3. A knock, software like knuckles on drywall. 4. I squeezed my eyes tighter. 5. 6. 7. The sound of breathing, wet, wrong. 8. 9. 10. A whisper, my name. Kyle. My spine locked up. 11. 12. 13. It kept whispering. Sometimes my name, sometimes other words, nonsense syllables like a mouth trying to form words it had never learned. 20, 21, 22. The handle of the stall door jiggled. I stayed completely still, silent and motionless, barely even breathing. By the time I hit 60, the room was dead silent. I waited 5 more seconds before opening my eyes. The stall door was still locked. Outside, nothing. There were no footprints or any sign of fog on the mirror. Nothing. I stepped out, looked around, and walked back into the office without saying a word. I didn't sleep the next day either. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the reflection in pump number 4, and it still hadn't moved. I kept replaying the exact moment in my head, the flicker of movement, the shape, the stillness. It haunted me throughout the day, crawling behind my thoughts like a second shadow. I even tried drawing it once, just to make sense of what I'd seen, but all I managed were messy lines and shaky outlines. Nothing on paper looked the way it felt. By early evening, I found myself parked in the same spot again, staring at the station's front door as it might blink. The desert around it looked the same, but that only made it worse. You start wishing something had changed. A storm, a broken window, a tire mark on the road. Anything that could prove the world was still moving. Inside, everything was untouched. The cooler had gone quiet again, as if it had spent all its energy the night before. The soda bottle was gone, not thrown out, just not there. The register clock still read 1:59, and even though I knew it didn't make sense, I took a sticky note and wrote the real time, 5:43 p.m., just to remind myself the rest of the world hadn't stopped spinning. I wiped down the counter. I swept a floor that didn't need sweeping. I checked the locks, the pump readings, the supply closet, and the restroom. All quiet, all still. But the silence wasn't passive anymore. It felt intentional, the kind of silence that waits. When night fell, I found myself watching my own reflection in the dark windows, waiting to see if it would move first. The third night began with a tightness behind my eyes, the kind that blooms from too many hours without sleep. I sat in my truck longer than usual, watching the headlights carve shadows across the pumps. The station looked quieter than before, like it was pretending to rest. Everything seemed too still, like the building was holding its breath. I stepped out when the clock on the dash read 8:58. Same time as always. The routine gave the night a shape, like ribs around a lung. But now it felt empty, like I was going through the motions of someone else's life. My boots touched the ground, and the fine layer of dust swirled at my feet, disturbed by movement it hadn't expected. The air was dry and cool, with the smell of cold metal and oil, the kind of smell that clings to you even after you leave. With every step toward the door, the dust curled up, almost playful, like it wanted to warn me. The bell above the entrance wasn't straight. It hung to one side, gently rocking even though the air was perfectly still. I pushed the door open and it gave way slowly, as if reluctant to allow me back inside. Inside, the cooler wasn't humming anymore. The silence made the fluorescent lights seem louder. Their buzz wasn't consistent. It fluctuated in long whines and sudden clicks, like someone trying to whisper and scream at the same time. The entire ceiling felt like it was breathing, one long exhale over my head. I walked through the station, checking every corner like I had done the nights before. The pumps outside were still. The windows were clean. The supply closet was undisturbed. The bathroom mirror was cloudy but unchanged. The sticky note on the register still read 5:43 p.m. Its corners curled up like dying leaves that had been left too long in the sun. The wall clock said 1:59. I tapped the glass, but the hands didn't move. I leaned on the counter and watched the pumps again. My eyes drifted to number 4. It remained off, silent and still. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Even from inside, I could feel something wrong with it, like the pump was watching me. The first hours passed without incident. I swept the floor even though it didn't need it, letting the sound of the bristles break the silence. The echo of each stroke was strangely satisfying, like I was brushing dust off the surface of a memory. I rearranged candy bars by expiration date, checked the receipt printer for any forgotten slips, and counted the coins in the till twice, maybe 3 times, just to keep my hands busy. Around 1 a.m., something shifted. It wasn't loud, more like a pull beneath the surface of things. The air got heavier. A single packet of gum slid off its rack with a small tap. I stared at it for a long time, then bent to pick it up. That's when I saw it, my own reflection in the freezer door, slightly delayed like it was reacting half a second after I did. When I moved, it followed, but not quite right. It blinked when I didn't. At 1:09 a.m., the payphone rang. That wasn't supposed to happen. According to the rules, if the phone rings at 1:13, don't answer it. Don't even go near it. But this was earlier. The digital clock blinked steadily. 1:09 a.m. Another ring echoed through the air. It sliced the silence in half. I took a few steps toward the window before freezing. The sound was sharper than it should have been. My breathing became shallow, and I could feel the rhythm of my pulse behind my eyes. It rang once more and stopped. I stared at the payphone. The receiver was swinging, plastic cord twisting back and forth, even though there was no breeze. The overhead light from pump 4 cast a dull orange hue across it, throwing shadows that didn't line up with anything around them. Then, a soft scraping noise came from behind the shelves. I turned. Nothing there. But the air buzzed. A quiet sob echoed near the entrance, cut off too soon. My breath clouded slightly, even though it wasn't cold. I turned back toward the payphone. It was still swinging. I forced myself back behind the counter and gripped the edge, my knuckles whitening. I watched the clock. It turned over to 1:13. The phone rang again. This time the sound grew louder, carrying a strange charge. Angry, as if someone or something was screaming without raising their voice. I flinched. My foot caught on the mat as I stepped back, a shock zipping up my spine. My balance tipped, but I caught myself. My hand had already moved. Fingers grabbed the keys automatically, and before I could convince myself otherwise, I was outside. My boots crunched on gravel, and I could hear each footstep like they were being amplified by something underground. The phone rang again, then again. By the 6th ring, I was there. I picked it up. No voice, just breathing, slow and labored with a wet, rattling undertone that seemed to crawl into my ears and settle there. Something was wrong with the air itself. It felt thick. Then a whisper came through. "Kyle." The voice was calm. Too calm, like it had always known this moment would come. "You heard it," it said. "You saw it." Then silence. The line clicked. I held the receiver to my ear for a long time after. My hand trembled. My breath caught. I could hear my own blood moving. As I turned to walk back, I glanced at my truck. The headlights were on. I hadn't touched them. The engine was off, but the interior light glowed faintly, and the driver's side door was ajar. I knew I had locked it. I always did. My breath caught in my throat as I stepped closer. The cab light revealed the outline of the keys still in the ignition. I reached for the handle, hesitated, then opened the door. The seat was undisturbed. Nothing appeared stolen, but the air inside felt recently occupied, still warm. I leaned in, glanced at the dashboard, and then checked the back seat. empty. I shut the door firmly and waited a second longer before turning to face the station again. I turned back toward the station. The interior was darker. The lights no longer flickered but had dimmed completely. The edges of the room blurred into shadow. Corners that had always been harmless were now dense with something unseen. I opened the door and stepped inside. The door felt heavier. The bell didn't chime. The clock above the register read 13:13. The sticky note was gone. I made my way to the restroom. The mirror wasn't cloudy anymore. It was black, like someone had poured ink across it and let it dry into glass. I reached out. My hand met the surface. It felt like cold water but didn't ripple. It accepted my touch but didn't return it. Then something moved in the glass. A figure stood where my reflection should have been. It wasn't me. Taller than I am, wearing the same uniform I had on, but its face lacked any features. It wasn't distorted or smudged. Its absence was complete, as if the face had never existed in the first place, as if the memory of a face had been removed from the world, like the idea of a face had been erased. It tilted its head slowly, as if studying me. Then it raised one hand and placed it against the glass, mirroring mine. Except the handprint was smaller. I stepped back, heart racing, the coldness of the mirror still lingering on my skin. It didn't follow. It remained there, hand pressed to the glass, silent and still. The void where its face should have been seemed to pull at something deep inside me, a place I didn't know existed. I felt a strange pressure behind my eyes, like tears that had forgotten how to fall. I didn't feel watched. I felt known. In the office, the drawer where I kept the rule sheet was locked. I had never locked it. My key didn't fit. The rules were gone. The candy jar was tipped over. Only one candy had rolled out, an orange one. I picked it up. It was warm, almost hot. The air around me buzzed. I could feel the pressure building in my ears like a storm was forming in the walls. Back at the counter, a receipt was stuck in the printer. It hadn't been printed while I was there. No transaction had been made. Only one line of text. Try again tomorrow. I folded the receipt and put it in my pocket. My hands were numb. The rest of the night passed without another sound. But the silence didn't feel safe anymore. It felt like waiting. And I knew whatever had reached out through that phone, whatever had whispered my name, wasn't done yet. My boots hit the gravel just past 8:58, the rhythm of each step slower than usual. I moved slowly, caught in a pause that felt heavier than hesitation. The kind of hesitation that doesn't feel like fear, but more like your body whispering something your mind won't say aloud. The station looked the same, quiet and hollow, but I could feel it watching. It wasn't about sight. It was something else entirely, something that pressed in like thick air, impossible to locate but impossible to ignore. That pressed against my skin, with memory. The air had a bite to it tonight, sharp and dry. The door didn't creak when I opened it. That worried me more than if it had screamed. Inside, the lights were dimmer again, and the buzzing was almost melodic, like it had found a tune of its own. I walked behind the counter and immediately bent down to open the drawer. Still locked. Still no rules. I tried the key again and jiggled it with more force, but it didn't fit. My hand stayed on the knob a moment longer than necessary, like I was expecting it to shift and let me in. When it didn't, I stood, leaned back, and stared at the ceiling. I tried to think, run through the rules in my head. Most of them were clear, almost burned in, but some felt like shadows, shapes without detail. I muttered to myself as I made coffee. Lock the front door at 11:59 and don't open it until sunrise. If pump 4 starts on its own, reset it without looking into the glass. The phone rang at 1:13, and I knew I shouldn't answer it. Don't sleep. Don't charge the sheriff. Don't talk. Don't break eye contact. I paused. there was something about the freezer room. No, that's not right. That wasn't on the list. I looked toward the back wall. The freezer's hum had returned. Steady, rhythmic, innocent. My chest felt tight. I remembered something about it. Something I wasn't supposed to do, but that part wasn't written down. Or maybe it had been, and I'd just forgotten. The rest of the night dragged like a wet cloth. I swept again, wiped the same spotless countertop 3 times, ate a candy bar I didn't want just for the wrapper's crinkle. Every minute felt swollen. By 12:42, I was sitting behind the counter trying to sketch the rule sheet from memory. The napkin I found in the supply drawer was already full of crossed-out phrases. I was halfway through trying to remember if the one about the closet came before or after the sheriff when the door opened. There was no creak or bell, just a shift in the air that reached me before the door even moved. But I felt the air shift. He stepped in like he'd always belonged there. Dusty boots, tan pants, beige button-up with the brown star sewn near the heart. His hat was low, casting his eyes in shadow. Sheriff's uniform. My spine straightened before my thoughts caught up. My eyes went to the napkin, then to the drawer. If a man wearing a sheriff's uniform enters the station and asks for coffee, make him one. Do not charge him. Do not speak. Do not break eye contact. He will leave when finished. The rule echoed clearly in my head, but something about it felt distant now, like it was being recited to me through a cracked window. The man stepped to the counter. His hands rested on the edge. He didn't speak. I nodded once, too quickly, and turned to the machine. The pot was still half full. I poured without looking back, hands shaking just enough to rattle the cup against the tray. I turned and placed it in front of him. My gaze locked with his. He didn't blink. His face was pale, lined in a way that didn't match his presence. My vision started to blur at the edges because of how long I had to keep looking. My muscles ached with stillness. He picked up the cup and took a sip. The sound of it, the small slurp and breath, was the only sound in the room. He drank slowly, eyes never leaving mine. Then he spoke. "You answered the phone." My chest seized. "I didn't," I whispered before I could stop myself. Immediate regret. Rule broken. "You left it off the hook." My throat dried. The phone. Last night. I had knocked it off the cradle. I hadn't heard the rings. "I used to work here too," he said. "Back before they wrote that rule. Before we knew what would happen." I stood frozen. Behind him, the window reflected his silhouette, but not mine. My stomach dropped. "You're forgetting the rules," he said. "I wrote them down," I whispered. He shook his head slowly. "Number. You tried, but memory doesn't stay here. The place eats it." He finished the cup, set it down carefully. "You'll see him again." Then he left. No sound, just absence. I turned to the napkin. It was blank. Every word is gone. The drawer still wouldn't open. The phone rang. Exactly 1:13. I flinched. The shrill sound echoed louder than it should have in the small, silent station. My eyes locked onto the receiver as it vibrated gently in its cradle. I didn't move toward it, but something in me shifted. A tightening. A flicker of memory. The phone had rung before, and I had picked up. Now it rang again, daring me. My hands curled into fists against the counter. I shouldn't have answered it. Maybe that's when everything started to shift. Maybe the call wasn't just a sound. Maybe it was a key. I remembered the voice on the line, warped and too slow, speaking as if underwater. I hadn't understood the words, but something had entered when I listened, and now the phone was ringing again. I took a step back, then forward. I couldn't decide. My pulse pounded. If I answered, I might make it worse. If I didn't, maybe something would come anyway. There was no good choice. I hated how loud it was. I hated how quiet everything else stayed. The ringing kept going. 6, 7, 8. Every second stretched longer than the last. My chest felt too tight. I wanted to scream at it to stop. I wanted to pull the plug, but I didn't move. Couldn't. My thoughts twisted. What if someone was listening through the line? What if it wasn't just a phone call but a door, and I had already opened it once? What if it was already open? The memory of the sheriff's words rang louder than the phone now. You left it off the hook. Had that been the moment I let something in? Was it still here, waiting, watching? I stood frozen in that moment, phone ringing, my mind spiraling. And then it stopped. Exactly 13 rings. Silence fell again. I felt no relief, only something worse. Regret. Then I heard footsteps outside. The window reflected a faint silhouette, a figure unmoving. My pulse jumped. The screen flickered again, and I thought about the phone. I shouldn't have picked up. Maybe it was the call that let him in. Maybe he was waiting for someone dumb enough to answer. That thought wouldn't leave me alone. Something had changed since I broke that rule. Strange events began to unfold, and something had begun to enter. Something watching. I stood still, the weight of his words wrapping around my chest. You're forgetting the rules. Maybe that's what this place wanted. Maybe that's how it fed itself. I backed away and stared at the screen. The screen buzzed with a low, static hum as I stepped back, my heart thudding like a second hand counting towards something inevitable. The image wavered, neither fully dark nor light. It murmured with the pulse of a broken signal. I stood there, unmoving, eyelids tense with the urge to blink. Behind that static veil, something lingered, not seen, but sensed. My voice was barely audible as I muttered the rules to myself, trying to glue the fragments back together. The screen pulsed again. My reflection looked unfamiliar, like a stranger caught behind glass. Stillness pressed against me. The station around me had grown even quieter, heavy in its silence. This night wasn't drawing to a close, it was only beginning. There was something about the freezer room. That thought returned and wouldn't leave. I moved toward the back, where the cold pressed against my skin like something alive. The hum of the freezer felt louder, layered with a frequency I couldn't place. My fingers hesitated on the handle of the small door tucked behind it. I didn't remember a rule about this door exactly, but something inside me whispered not to open it. I opened it. A stale gust of air hit me. The cold inside was different, older, untouched. The room was small and empty at first glance, except for a calendar hanging crooked on the wall. The year printed in bold, 1983. I stepped inside. My breath fogged the air. The walls felt too close, the silence too dense. In the corner, a detergent box sat undisturbed. I lifted the lid. Inside was a faded plastic card. Edgar Mullen, night manager. The photo was worn, edges curled. My stomach turned. Something in the air shifted. The lights outside the room dimmed as if reacting to the open door. I turned to leave and stepped back into the main hall. The clock read 3:12. I blinked. When I entered, it had been just past 2 o'clock. I'd only been inside for minutes or so, I thought. The shift in time hit harder than the cold. I stumbled toward the counter and pulled up the security monitor. The static cleared just enough to show a figure drifting down aisle 3, his hand grazing the shelves. I leaned closer. He wore the same torn uniform from the photo on the ID card. Edgar Mullen. The face was pale, unfocused, lips slightly parted as he moved past the displays like someone remembering a life they'd never lived. I watched as he moved with purpose, slow and deliberate, toward the back office. Grabbing the flashlight, I followed, trying not to breathe. The hall stretched longer than it should have, or maybe it just felt that way. When I pushed the door open, the office was empty, but the shift schedule on the wall had changed. Fresh ink, 4 signatures, all in the same shaky handwriting. Edgar Mullen. The notebook on the desk trembled. Pages fluttered until one stopped on its own. A torn sheet, yellowed by age, curled upward at the corners. In sharp black letters, barely legible but furious in their form. He broke the seal. The page lifted on its own, tore cleanly from the spine, and drifted down like a warning. I turned toward the sound of knocking, not loud, but steady. I walked back toward the front window. A figure stood there, barely lit by the flickering sign above. His shape was familiar. He didn't move. His silhouette seemed fused to the glass, as if he'd always been part of it. Behind me, the lights dimmed in a slow chain, each one giving out in rhythm. I stood in the glow of the last bulb, my heart racing. The silence was thick now, the kind of silence that watches, and I knew I wasn't alone in the building anymore. Another shift, another night I didn't want. The air already felt heavier when I stepped inside, like the place had been waiting. I slumped behind the counter, not even pretending to be alert anymore. I just wanted it to end. The clocks felt off. On the security monitor behind the counter, the digital display blinked and reversed. 1:29, 1:30, then back again. Above the cooler, the wall clock's minute hand stuttered in place, twitching back and forth in a jittery, almost pained rhythm. Something else caught my attention behind the counter. A small notebook tucked beside the receipts and spare keys. I didn't remember placing it there. The cover was cracked leather, worn smooth at the edges like it had been handled many times. I flipped it open. The handwriting was jagged, panicked. I scanned a few entries. Most were notes, timestamps, and names I didn't recognize. One stood out. The page was stained, the ink smeared in places. But the words were readable. They come when the world softens, when time loosens its grip and the seconds thin. I tried to stay awake, but the warmth pulled me under. That's when he came. I didn't hear him, didn't feel him, but something sat in my place as if the station itself had chosen someone else to wear my skin. My skin crawled. Below the text, in smaller, shakier writing, was a date. July 3rd, 1983. Then a name, barely more than a smudge, but immediately familiar. Edgar Mullen. And in that moment, it all lined up. The calendar in the freezer, the strange flood headline, the handwriting. All of it pointed back to the same time. This didn't start with me. It began in 1983, and Edgar had been the first to break something we were never meant to touch. I turned the page, and more scribbles followed, frantic scrawlings about reflections that blinked out of sync, footsteps that came before shadows, warnings about staying awake. He waits in the flicker. One line repeated again and again. I didn't know how long I stood there reading, but with each line, the air grew colder. Not from fear, literally colder. The counter surface grew slick with condensation. The security monitor glitched, stuttering on the same 3 seconds of footage. My own image looped, standing still, flipping pages, then starting over. I snapped the notebook shut. Something had changed around me, and it wasn't just the station. It was close to 3:10. That much I knew. I rubbed my eyes and stared up at the lights. One flicker, another, a pause, then a third. They didn't move with any pattern I recognized. The rhythm was strange, offbeat. It reminded me of the rule, but it wasn't the same. Was that 3 quick flickers? Or just flickers? Was I supposed to move? My chest tightened. I remembered this. I had been through this. But the memory only made it worse. I bolted toward the restroom. The door groaned open like it had last time. Inside, the lights had a reddish hue, dim and pulsing. I went to the far stall, the one I remembered. I shut the door, fumbled the lock, sat down, shut my eyes, and counted. 1, 2, 3, something moved. Not inside, but nearby. A dry scrape like something dragged across the tile. Footsteps. Then nothing. 18, 19, 20. A whisper brushed through the stall, too faint to understand. My body tensed. My thoughts started to drift. Was I at 29? 32? I forced my lips to move. 35, 36. Somewhere between 40 and 50, I opened my eyes. I don't know when. I don't know why. The stall felt larger than before. The walls seemed farther apart, the ceiling higher. I blinked, confused. Everything was still. There was no sound or flicker, just a strange stillness that seemed to stretch the air itself. I stepped out. My breath clouded in the air. Cold. Much colder than it should have been. Back in the station, the changes hit me one by one. The magazine rack was flipped over. Coffee pots were still steamed, but the glass was cracked. One of the chairs by the window faced the wrong direction. A broom I never used was lying across the entrance. The radio was on, but silent. Just static hissing at a low hum. I glanced at the monitors. The main feed showed me behind the counter, but I wasn't there. Not anymore. My stomach turned. The screen showed me still sitting, hands on my knees, head lowered. I watched for a few seconds until the figure finally moved, a half second behind me. The delay was small, but it was real. The station was lagging. My head pounded. I looked away, instinctively glancing at the reflection in the cooler door. I couldn't. I turned my head before I caught more than the outline. My reflection didn't feel like mine anymore. The walls pulsed slightly with light. The glow moved like breath. I checked the candy shelf. The gummy worms were where the chips should be. The price tags were handwritten in red marker, something I never did. Each step I took through the station deepened the sense of wrongness. Nothing looked violently altered, yet everything felt misplaced. A quiet rearrangement that mocked my memory. Familiar, but subtly distorted. I walked past the counter. My elbow brushed a stack of newspapers I hadn't seen before. The top headline read something about a flood in a town I didn't recognize. The date was 1983. Again. Same year, same headline. I'd seen it before. The feeling of looping back clawed at me, as if time itself was stuck, dragging me along a track already worn thin. I stood there for a moment, staring at the yellowed paper, trying to shake the thought. It stayed. Had Edgar seen the same things? Had he stood right here, reading this, feeling the same dread crawl up his spine? Was I walking his path or being dragged into it? A part of me wanted to trust him. He seemed like someone trying to leave warnings, someone who fought back. But another part whispered something darker. What if Edgar didn't just fall victim to this place? What if he became part of it? I stepped into the restroom and splashed cold water on my face. When I looked up, the mirror above the sink showed a reflection that looked wrong. Not monstrous, just unfamiliar in a way that sent a shiver down my spine. Bloodshot eyes, pale lips. My tongue felt like it had rusted in my mouth. I tried to speak but coughed instead. I hadn't slept. I knew I hadn't, but part of me doubted it. My limbs ached, and my head was heavy like I'd just woken from a nightmare I couldn't remember. My hands trembled. When I pressed my palm against the cool porcelain, it steadied me just enough to keep going. Whatever I'd done, whatever that rule was meant to prevent, I had crossed a line, and something had crossed over with me. I walked back into the main area, rubbing my eyes, trying to make sense of the warped silence that greeted me. The lights pulsed above in uneven intervals, and the air felt thick, like the moment before a thunderclap. Then, just past 4 o'clock, a sound broke through the stillness. 3 soft knocks, then louder, then fists. I froze behind the counter. The front door shook. I could see the shadow of a man, distorted by the glass, pacing. Then he stopped and pressed both hands against the door. "Please," he said. "Please let me in. I'm lost. I've been walking for hours." I didn't move. "I'm freezing. There's something out here. I can't." He screamed, pounded the door again, voice cracking. "You have to help me. Please, man, please." I stepped back, my body shaking. I could see his face now, Normal, terrified, tears streaked, nothing monstrous. But the rule was clear. Don't open the door, even if they knock, even if they beg. "I'm sorry," I whispered. The man heard me, his eyes locked onto mine. His breath hitched as if trying to hold back another cry. Then, without warning, the sobbing stopped. His face went slack, lips pressed into a thin line, eyes wide and still focused on me. The pleading collapsed into silence, and the silence felt heavier than his voice ever did. Stopped moving. He just stared, for a long, long time. Then he backed away. 1 step, 2, turned, and walked into the darkness without a sound. The lights inside the station hummed louder than before. I stood there, heart racing, whispering the rule again and again to remind myself that I had done what I was supposed to. I followed the rules. I did what was written. And yet, something kept gnawing at me, a question I couldn't shut out. What if it hadn't been just a warning, but something that set things in motion? What if by following it, I had allowed something to cross over? Not letting him in felt like a choice I made, not just a line I followed. And now, every breath in that room felt like it belonged to something else, watching, waiting. I had done what the paper told me. Still, something felt wrong. Everything did. The routine began like it always did, only now, it felt more like a performance. I unlocked the door with the station key and stepped into the gas station's humming silence. It didn't greet me this time. It regarded me as if waiting for me to fail once more. I tossed my bag behind the counter and stood there, staring at the floor tiles. I hadn't really slept. Even when I closed my eyes, the dreams never felt like mine. They felt like memories I was borrowing or stealing. Before anything else, I made my way to the snack shelf and tore into a bag of gummy worms. I remembered the rule written in Edgar's notebook. Do not fall asleep. You must not sleep while on the property. If you begin to feel drowsy, eat something sweet and recite your name, loudly, repeatedly. I chewed slowly, listening to the sugar crackle in my teeth. My voice echoed against the walls as I repeated my name. Kyle Morgan, Kyle Morgan, Kyle Morgan. I felt like a lunatic. The words sounded hollow, cartoonish in the fluorescent haze, but I said them anyway. I didn't trust my body to tell me when it had slipped into dreaming anymore. Better to obey than to be tricked. After I'd swallowed the last gummy worm, I walked the aisles. The store had rearranged itself again. The change wasn't sudden, but it stood out in ways I couldn't ignore. The magazines were back in their racks, but this time in a different order. The rows of candy bars were now facing the windows, not the counter. My memory was good. The station's memory was better. As I passed by the employee door near the back, a soft sound made me stop. A knock. It came again, quieter the second time. Knock. Knock. I froze. At first, I thought the knocking came from outside, maybe the back lot, maybe the glass door. But the sound had weight and direction. It was inside. My hand hovered over the drawer where the rule list was still kept. I opened it slowly, the pages trembling as I unfolded them. My eyes landed on the sentence I didn't want to see. If you hear someone knocking inside the supply closet, ignore it. That door stays locked, always. Always. But that word meant less now. Every rule had turned into a puzzle, a veil, a warning written too late. I wanted to know. I needed to know what was behind that door. I turned the key from the chain on my belt, felt it click in the lock, and slowly pulled the door open. The light inside flickered on by itself. The air was still and cold. Inside, stacked between buckets and unopened cartons of windshield wipes, were 3 bodies. At least I think they were bodies. They looked folded, crumpled like clothes left in water too long. Faces slack and stretched unnaturally, skin pale and thin like wax, eyes wide open. One of them had their mouth frozen in a silent scream, jaw unhinged far too wide. Their arms and legs were pulled into themselves, bent backward in ways no human body should be. I gagged. The smell hit a second later and I slammed the door shut. I didn't lock it, just backed away, my heartbeat pounding against my ribcage like it wanted out. They weren't just dead, they had been emptied. Skin crawlers. The word popped into my mind without asking, like I'd heard it before. Maybe Edgar had written it, or maybe I was starting to understand the station's language. I needed air. I stepped outside the back door into the delivery lot, gulping the night into my lungs. It didn't help. The sky above looked wrong. Stars blinked in and out like static. One constellation shimmered, then folded into another. And then I saw him. He was standing at the edge of the lot, wearing the same coat, the same worn cap, the same hunched stance. Edgar Mullen. He didn't move or speak, just stood there as if he'd never left. I stepped forward slowly. "Edgar?" He raised his hand, not in greeting but with a deliberate motion, his finger pointing toward the gas pumps. I turned slowly. Pump number 3 was missing its nozzle. Instead, something long and dark slithered from the handle to the ground. It twitched, then pulled back inside like a worm retreating. When I looked back, Edgar was gone. Inside, the monitor at the counter blinked. A new feed had appeared. Camera 9. We didn't have a camera 9. It showed the supply closet, from inside, facing the door. The bodies were gone. My mouth went dry. My knees felt hollow. I tried to speak, to say my name again, but the words wouldn't come. Then the monitor flickered again. The image twisted and blurred until it showed me standing on the other side of the closet door. But my mouth was open wider. My face drooped unnaturally. My arms hung too long. It's not me. Not anymore. I hit the power button. The screen went black. For a while, I sat on the floor behind the counter. The floor felt more stable than the air. I read Edgar's notebook again. New pages. Pages I hadn't seen. It doesn't want to be understood. It wants to be repeated. We are steps in a process, not people. Every rotation tightens the loop. Every shift is a rehearsal. The thing is becoming clearer. At the bottom, a line scratched deeper than the rest. If you see it, do not speak. It listens with your mouth. I ran to the bathroom, splashed my face, looked up. The mirror showed 2 reflections. One, me. One, almost me. The mouth moved slower. The eyes blinked late. I froze, unable to tear my eyes away as the thing in the mirror curled its lips into a slow, deliberate smile. A chill spread through my chest, followed by the sound of my own scream tearing out before I could stop it. I bolted, feet barely touching the ground as I stumbled out of the bathroom, away from the thing that looked like me but wasn't. I returned to the main room and stood behind the counter, trying to ground myself in what I assumed was reality. But something was off. My reflection in the window didn't line up with my movements. When I spoke, the echo came seconds late, and my shadow, cast faintly against the back wall, shifted before I did as if it was anticipating me instead of following. The drawer was still locked, the paper with the rules trapped inside. I tried the handle again and jiggled it with growing frustration. It didn't budge. I stared at the lock, teeth clenched. With a sudden surge of anger, I kicked the drawer hard. The impact echoed through the station. Instead of reaching for the paper immediately, I turned to Edgar's notebook. I needed to make sense of something. My fingers flipped through the pages like they had a purpose of their own. The words swam for a moment, then sharpened into meaning. Then I saw it. A sentence wedged between passages, recently written, the ink still slightly raised. You will know the final rule when you're ready to break it. Edgar there lowered the notebook slowly. The silence felt heavier now. My breath was shallow. My body didn't feel like mine anymore. I sat there waiting for the next knock, or the next flicker, or the next version of myself to step out of the dark and ask to be let in. Whatever happened next, it would come soon, and I would be watching, just like Edgar had, just like the ones before him, just like the ones after me. The lights didn't flicker when I stepped in that night. They buzzed steadily and constantly as if holding their breath. I walked to the counter without scanning the aisles. Everything looked normal, almost too normal, as if the station had reset itself, preparing for something I couldn't name. Behind the register, I didn't bother reaching for a snack or repeating my name. Speaking aloud no longer felt protective. It felt like it summoned attention. My voice had lost its power as a shield. It drew things in. Instead, I opened Edgar's notebook. Pages that had been blank the night before were now filled. Some sentences echoed thoughts I hadn't yet written down. Maybe I never had to. It didn't matter who wrote them. They belonged to the station now. There's always one who sees the whole thing, and there's always one who walks away. They are never the same, but they walk. Sometimes they're the same person, sometimes not. I closed the book. The radio crackled. Local reports say the strange electrical surges in Duchesne County are likely tied to... The words faded into static. I was already walking. The supply closet door stood half open. I had opened it once before. The bodies inside were gone, taken, or moved. A faint smear of something oily trailed from the threshold toward the back aisle. I followed the trail around the cooler. The scent hit first, scorched copper, wet earth, and something synthetic. Behind a fallen sign, I found the remains of a body. It wore my name tag. The clothes hung loosely, draped over a hollow form. The jaw looked unhinged, and one eye sat deeper than the other. A lifeless impression, a collapsed version of myself. I knelt, reached. My fingers passed through the fabric. It wasn't real. Or maybe it had been, once. Whatever it was fading. A sound came, sharp and deliberate. 3 knocks, then a longer one. Not from the closet this time, beneath the floor. I stood frozen, counted silently. The flickering above returned, disjointed and erratic, more like questions than warnings. "I see you," I whispered. The lights held still. I turned back to the drawer with the rules. Still locked. No need to open it. I remembered each line, but I wasn't just remembering. I was reliving. The same night. Again. A candy wrapper I'd thrown away was back on the shelf. Blood I'd scrubbed off the tile had reappeared. The radio broadcast hadn't changed. At the register, a receipt stuck from the printer. Date, March 19th, 1983. Edgar's last shift. Everything pointed to the same moment. I was caught inside his loop. What did he do when it came to this point? I wondered whether he had run, fought, or tried to warn someone if he had done anything at all. But more than that, I wondered whether I could trust him. His words had guided me so far. Still, I couldn't shake the thought that he might have become part of the trap. Maybe the station had reshaped him too. The lights above me flickered again, and I noticed it then. There was movement. Outside, through the window, figures skittered across the lot. They weren't shadows or tricks of the eye. They were real, too tall, too thin, with limbs that bent the wrong way. Slits where eyes should have been. Stitched skin, crawling and twisting like fabric over the wire. The skin crawlers were no longer hidden. They moved toward the station with purpose, their twisted forms illuminated by the flickering lights. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering against my ribs. The front door shook violently as something dragged across the glass, nails, claws, or something worse. Every instinct screamed at me to act, to move before it was too late. Edgar's notebook lay open on the counter. I grabbed it, flipping quickly through the pages until a single line locked me in place. When the system begins to repeat, sever the line. Let it forget you. The words hit with a strange clarity. I looked up just as one of the creatures slipped out of sight, vanishing around the edge of the car wash. My breath caught. There was no more time. I darted for the rear exit. The night air slapped my face as I pushed through. The lot seemed to stretch endlessly, each step heavier than the last. The The skin crawlers weren't just behind me, they were circling, moving in that unnatural crawl, limbs bending in impossible angles. I weaved between gas pumps, ducked low past a flickering sign, and turned sharply toward the car wash. The path twisted in my memory, longer and darker than it should have been. My lungs burned. I reached the side door and yanked it open. Inside, the generator room buzzed with a low hum. Panels blinked, and wires trembled with current. At the center stood a lever labeled Main Override. I gripped it and pulled. The lights blinked once, then vanished. Sound collapsed in on itself, swallowed by the vacuum that followed. Even the air felt still, as if the building itself had exhaled and refused to breathe again. A deep red glow spread slowly across the room like a pulse. Then it died. All of it. I woke on the pavement near Pump 3, where the first light of morning painted the sky in soft gray and gold. The air smelled of dust, dry sage, and lingering gasoline. I tasted metal on my tongue. My shirt was stuck to my back with sweat, and my arms were marked with grime, scrapes, and something darker I couldn't name. I sat up slowly, knees trembling, head swimming with 1,000 images that didn't feel like memory, but something older, heavier. I checked my hands, turning them over like I expected them to belong to someone else. The station stood in silence, empty and stripped of everything familiar. Its windows were dark, the brittle, out-of-service sign twisting gently in the breeze. Inside, faint outlines showed where shelves once stood. The counter had vanished, and the register sat lifeless, surrounded by still air and silence so heavy it felt deliberate. It was like walking through a husk. Nothing remained of the noise, the flickering lights, or the chaos of the nights before. I stepped through the broken doorframe, dust rising with each step. The scent of oil and scorched wires still lingered faintly, but now it was buried under age and neglect. As I moved deeper, past the faded floor tiles and collapsed signage, I noticed something sticking out from the hollow base of the ruined counter. I moved slowly across the station's remains, my steps echoing off the cracked tiles and empty shelves. The building was silent now, stripped of its madness, but it wasn't peaceful. It felt paused, like it had been caught mid-breath. Dust swirled at my feet as I passed the collapsed counter, scanning what was left of the place. And there, half buried beneath broken wood and scattered receipts, something caught my eye. I crouched down and pulled it loose. Edgar's notebook. The spine was warped, the cover torn, but it was his, no mistaking it. I opened it with fingers that shook. Many pages were stained or blank, some were torn down the middle, but between two damaged sheets I found a loose page folded in half, written in the same messy scrawl I had seen before. I couldn't end it, but maybe someone else can. If you're reading this, it's because the loop let you go, or it wants something more. I don't know which is worse. I sat there for a moment, knees pressed against broken tile, notebook open on my lap. I didn't know if I had survived something or stepped into something new. I didn't know if what I remembered was real or stitched together by fear, but I had this page, and I had walked away. I folded the note, slipped it into my jacket, and stood up. There was no answer waiting for me, no closure, but I turned anyway and stepped into the pale light outside, the station's bones behind me, the road ahead stretching quiet and long. I'm writing this from a small diner west of Duchenne. It's morning now, or at least I think it is. I found a napkin and a forgotten pen, and I can't stop my hand from moving. Something in me must get this out, even if no one reads it. I'm not sure what I escaped, or if I ever did. The images haven't faded. Edgar's jagged handwriting, the knock from beneath the tiles, the silence when the loop finally collapsed. I remember the scent of burnt wires, the feel of the air when everything went still, and the red pulse before the lights went out for good. If you're ever in this part of Utah and come across a station that doesn't appear on any map, one that looks too old and too quiet, as if it's waiting for something, keep driving. Don't stop. Don't ask questions. Don't look twice. And if you glance into a dark window and catch your own reflection staring back a little too long, don't raise your hand. Just walk away. If it raises its hand first, it's already too late. Sleep doesn't come to me now. I stay awake, alert to the strange rhythms that echo through the world. My eyes scan the sky for shapes or shifts I can't explain. Edgar's notebook is always with me, the pages worn from being turned over and over. His words are a map I can't stop following. Somewhere along the line, I stepped into his role. Maybe I finished what he couldn't. Maybe I just picked up where he ended. I follow the rules. They don't keep me safe. They remind me I'm still here most of the time.